Hello arty peoples and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy and I am your host this evening. Now today I have a really fun kind of paint along planned and I really hope you guys get to join in with me in this process. It's going to be a lot of fun, but before I do jump into all of this, I wanted to remind you that if you are interested in any of the supplies that I will be using, you guys can go to the website JerrysArtarama.com and check out the teacher's cart. So if you type in the search bar today's class code, which is JL353, which is going to be down here in the corner of the screen the whole time. Type that in the search bar, teacher's cart should come up and you can check all this out over there. So, like I said, we're going to be doing a paint along today, and we're going to be working in gouache. Now, a quick reminder of what gouache is in case you are unaware. Gouache is actually an opaque watercolor. So, I do know that there are a lot of different variations of gouache and it can be a little confusing. We do have an entire episode on the different types of gouache that we sell, and that ranges from acrylic gouache, which is more permanent, to the traditional gouache that we're going to be using today. Now this is the Turner Design Gouache. So what that means is, just like watercolor, once it dries on your palette, on your paper, no matter where it is, it can be reactivated with water. So it's going to act just like watercolor. The only difference with this to watercolor is that this is going to have an opacity to it. So it's going to have a lot of beautiful layering techniques that we can do here, where you're going to be working with the water and working on the transparency levels. And then you can also go all the way out over to pure opacity and kind of obliterate anything that's underneath. It's going to be a really fun little technique that we will be showing you. But I wanted to also let you know, today I'm going to be working on the Magnani block. It's the Portofino paper, which, if you are unfamiliar, Portofino means that it is a hot press. That is their term for the hot press paper that they have. And as you can see, this is a round block, which is really fun. Now, this does come with a bag that you would put this in, because once you pull off this initial front cover, your block is going to be exposed, right? So that bag will protect it. So make sure you hold on to the bag that this comes with. But this is a block of watercolor paper, so it is glued on all sides except for like right here where there's a little bit of an opening, just so you can pull it off of the block once we're done. And if you saw the thumbnail, or right before I just kind of pulled that off to the side, this is actually the image we are going to be working on today. Now, this is not from just my imagination. I am working with a reference image, and if you guys are interested in getting the reference images, my amazing moderators Amanda and Michaela can pop in the link to that so that you guys can grab that image and have it in like a really high quality version, so you can work off of it that way, because I'm not going to be having this on my table the entire time where it's going to be visible to you. The other thing to note is I'm going to be working on this image, but we're going to start from absolute zero, on the blank block. But the thing to know is that I will not be able to complete this entire thing on this 1 hour show. I am working with a time limit. So what I'm going to actually be doing, and just so you are aware, I'm going to start with the initial wash, which is what you would do for the whole thing, but then I'm going to just kind of work on just one half of the image. Now, whilst we're doing all these different layering, you would want to work on the entire, both sides of it as you go along. I just know that I'm going to run out of time, and I want to be able to show you all the different layers that way, but it is going to just be on the one half is what I'm going to focus on. Do we have a question already?
Yes, we have a couple questions about the paper.
Yeah.
The first question is it archival?
Absolutely archival. What's really cool is that on every single one of their blocks, you're going to see these, I guess, kind of icons here. The first one means that it's mold made, which is kind of the process of what it's pressed down into a mold to give you the different type of textures. Cold press is going to have more texture than the hot press. I like a really smooth surface, so that's why I chose this Portofino, which is the hot press. And then there's also rough press out there in the watercolor world that's even rougher. But that's what that means, is the mold made, which that's the mold that it's made in. Acid free is there's no acidity to this paper, so over time it's not going to yellow on you and it's not going to start breaking down, which means it's going to have a long life, which is that logo right there. And then OBA free means that it doesn't have any optical brightening agents. That I also, remind me, that can deteriorate the paper over time. Yes, Katie confirmed. So I remember that correctly.
Can deteriorate over time and can fade over time. So what you
yes.
thought was bright white is not actually bright white.
Yeah. So the optical brighteners, initially they can make your paper look really nice and crisp and bright white. But over time, if that starts fading out and deteriorating, not only does your paper kind of yellow over time, it's something we don't want to worry about. So this is actually a really lovely, very archival, very wonderful paper for you to work on. Watercolor or gouache, you know, options. All right, so like I said, we're going to be working with the Turner Design Gouache. I have this set of 18, and one more question.
Sorry. I'm sorry if you already had mentioned this, but the bag. What is the importance of the bag for these paths?
The bag comes with the round blocks specifically, and I actually don't have it on hand right now. It might actually still be in the drawer where I pulled it from. Didn't grab it, sorry. But what it means is, so when you go to pull off the front cover, because your block will come like this, right? So this front cover is glued down, and you will remove it just like you would remove a sheet of paper from a block, right? So once you do your artwork and you pull that piece of paper off your block, and then you go to do whatever it is that you do with your artwork, now your block has nothing covering it, nothing protecting it, kind of a thing. So the bag that it comes with, I believe, is also very archival, and they've made sure that it's a really good, I'm sorry, I don't know where I put the bag.
Little one.
There's a little one too. There's two different sizes of the rounds that we can show you guys. Here we go. So this is the Italia, which is the cold press paper. So Italia, sorry, I don't realize you're not on the overhead words. So this is the Italia. It's the smaller size round, but it comes with a little bag. So right now, that is attached, it's not coming off, and my paper is protected. Once I pull off this cover, my paper is exposed, and if I want to throw this in my backpack, or if I want to go throw this somewhere in my studio, I want to make sure that my paper is protected. So I have this little bag, and it fits right in there, and you can cinch it, and it's protected. Bag. But the big one also comes with the bag where it fits perfectly in there too, and it has Magnani written on the front of it, so it's not like you can confuse what it is. And what I love is that once you're done with the block and you've done all that you can with this paper, then you have a really fun bag where you can just put all of your art supplies in there. Question?
Can you talk about framing this?
That is actually, we were just talking about this. So we do have a round frame, and I wish I had, can we pop it in the teacher's cart? That would be great if we could. This is a 12-inch, or I'm sorry, 12.6-inch block of paper. Now, the frame that we do have available, I believe, comes in 12-inch, so you might have to trim this down just a bit before you officially get it into the frame, but we do have frames available that are round, and I would say if you want to put this under glass, you would have to talk to a glass cutter and have them just cut a round, like a 12-inch round piece of glass for you. But that's the way that I would absolutely do it. So, I better get started before we run out of time. I also have my airtight palette here, which is Soho brand, and that's where I have squeezed all of my beautiful colors into my palette. I love this for like a set of 18 set of colors, because there are 18 of about the same size wells. There's a couple more on the front in case I want to make like custom colors and custom mixes, but it has this huge mixing space right in the center, which is, I love it so much. Now, to get started, what I'm going to do is actually do an initial wash. So when it comes to gouache and watercolor, you typically want to start with your lights and go to dark, right? So we are going to essentially move around my palette here, and we're going to start with the white, and then we're going to move around essentially towards the black. And that way, if we stick with that kind of direction, it's going to go naturally from my my lighter colors over to my darker colors. But I am going to start with a mix of white and just a teeny tiny amount of this, I think it's permanent lemon yellow. So it is a pretty bright color. And remember that gouache is a watercolor, so you can add as much water to this as you want. And then on my block here, essentially, I'm going to just pick a spot where my pathway is going to go. And I'm going to say, if I'm basing it off of my image, right? Even if I lay my image down and I kind of have my trees going up to the sides about kind of where I want it, if I keep my eye on where that is, that's where it's going to be, right? That's where my bright white pathway is going to lead. And then I'm going to get that nice and saturated. All right. I'm going to rinse off my brush. It's not perfectly rinsed off, but I'm going to start adding a little bit more yellow. And if you see my my reference image, it almost halos out, right? Where it goes from a bright white to like a yellow to an orange, out all the way to like this purpley kind of color up at the top. And that's essentially what we're doing for this first initial wash. Now, the cool thing is it doesn't have to be perfect because the majority of this we're going to cover up, right? But we're going to kind of work almost like a bullseye. And what I like to do is if I get a little bit, even if you get like a rag or paper towel and get most of your paint off where it's almost like you're dry brushing, you can kind of dry brush one color into the other and almost blend it out. I just don't want hard edges is what I'm trying to avoid, right? And then I get more and more yellow as I go. Now, at the bottom, I'm going to start indicating there's sort of a pathway here just by taking I'm using flat brushes. This is the Mimic Kolinsky Sables. So it is a synthetic version of Kolinsky Sables, but it's a really lovely watercolor brush. Holds a lot of water. But I'm using my flat, and I'm using a quite large one because I want to cover a lot of area. And I'm going to use that flat edge. I'm just going to kind of drag it back and forth horizontally, right? That'll give me kind of the impression of where my pathway is. And then I'm going to move on from the yellow to, let me just double check the color, Permanent Yellow Deep. It's like a yellow orange essentially, right? And if I go do the exact same thing, right? And then kind of indicate there is pathway happening. And then rinse off my brush. It's not perfectly rinsed, but I'm getting the majority of the water and paint off of there. And that way I can kind of fluff out those edges and just kind of soften that transition a little bit. Now I'm not worried about the outer edges because I know I'm going to go on top of those, and that's okay. Because now I'm going to go to this, I believe this is the Permanent Orange. It's a pretty vibrant orange. Now this one, I can start watering down, which is pretty lovely.
Emmy?
Yes.
Does gouache have to be kept moist in the palette, or can it be successfully reactivated once it dries?
Well, remember what I just said was that gouache is just like watercolor, so if it's on your palette, if it's on your paper, no matter what, it's going to reactivate with water. So once it dries on your palette, you can still use it. Like this right here, I would leave this just as it is. It's a Soho airtight palette, so it will stay wet for longer as long as I keep that lid down on it. But it's one of those things that even if it does dry over there, I can just spritz the whole thing with water and the whole thing would reactivate. Now with this orange, I'm not trying to get full saturation, okay? I don't want it to be super punchy orange. I'm gonna use it a lot more like watercolor and give me some really light washes just to kind of indicate that that color is there, right? Because again, with gouache, layering is the name of the game.
Emmy?
Yes?
Is there a reason you didn't start with the light wash of plain water over the whole thing first? Like, is there a reason you're doing wet on dry?
It's going to be easier for me to control where my colors go, because if I had made this entire thing wet, the whole thing is going to want to get real fuzzy, which if that's the way that you want to work, there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I like to control where it's going, and I don't want my orange to run all the way over here because that's where I'm going to put like a purpley kind of color. And if I had my orange run all the way over there, orange and blue are opposite on the color wheel, so they're going to kind of make a bunch of mud, which is never fun. Now, to make sure that I have a good transition between that orange and the purple I'm about to put in here, I am going to go, and there's actually, I'm going to indicate with this red color, and I believe I used, this is the permanent red. I skipped the permanent scarlet, which I will use later on, but I'm going to just indicate that there is a tree sort of here. I'm not being perfect about it. I'm just kind of going, there's a tree. Something's happening there, right? Your tree might look a little different than mine, but I like that it's got, the bottom half is sort of peeking in, but it's not fully in there. And then, of course, I also have this other tree that kind of frames it as well. And I could do the same thing over here and indicate that there is sort of a tree situation happening there. Right? Frames it quite nicely. And then I'm going to go back in with a little bit of this red. And just where that pathway kind of comes in a little bit, just going to touch in just a really light wash of red. And then I'm going to continue over here with a little bit more of that red. But again, I'm working in like a very washy watercolor kind of way. That's also still a little much. I want less pigment there because I want to just tint that orange a little bit more red, just so I can have a break between that purple and that orange. Then of course we're going to get into this lovely purple, which I think is Brilliant Violet, which is one of my, I do love that it is actually a fluorescent pigment, which is less archival, but I'm okay with that because it is such a beautiful color, right? And I'm just going to pop in the fact that there are purples. I'm going to go on the other side of this tree. You have a question?
Yes. When it comes to painting like this, would you use a toned paper, or is white always the best?
Gouache is one of those things where you can very easily work on toned paper because it has that opacity. But that tone, whatever color you're working on, is going to affect your colors. So as long as you're aware of that, you're okay. Right, so I'm gonna, again, get most of the pigment off my brush, and I have a little bit of a dust fuzz bunny over here. Get that off of there. And you see how I'm pulling, because that purple leans a little bit more towards the red, once I layer that orange, it's gonna look a little less saturated, but it's still not mud. It's still a pretty color, which is important. Because if I had used a purple that leaned more towards blue, like a blue violet, that would not be pretty. So it's one of those things where sometimes you might have the wrong purple, but as long as you understand which color bias it goes, you're gonna be okay. All right, and then I am going to darken just because I can see with my trees, they have some shadows. Now, this one has it on this side and this one has it on this side, kind of like the light's coming from here, which is a little bizarre because the light source looks like it's coming from here. Now, if you wanted to reverse that, you could, but I'm going to kind of indicate that there is a bit of a shadow. I'm going to follow the reference image by indicating that there's a shadow. Now, I'm not indicating it with black. I'm indicating it with this violet because if I were to indicate that with black, black is a very strong color, and because these reactivate, I know that that can actually really desaturate my my colors quite quickly, and so I will leave black as a lovely color that I can use at the very end of my painting, but I'm not going to rely on it until I really need to darken my values. And then here's the other side of this tree. And you see I'm being really loose with it. I'm not trying to get very precise. This might be a lot closer, and I can tell you it definitely is a lot closer than what I'm actually seeing in the image. That's okay. I'm not trying to copy the image perfectly. I'm just using it as sort of inspiration. There's a little bit of a knot there, but then it sort of goes around. And what's cool is that if you have almost a dry brush, you can get this really fun dry brush effect, which is going to help you have it appear like a tree, like it has bark. So it's something that you can keep in mind for all the different layers that you're going to do for your tree.
Emmy.
Yes.
This is kind of my question, but if you were more comfortable with sketching it out first, do you think this gouache would cover better than watercolor would over the pencil lines?
It would, but when it comes to sketching in your image, do you really need a pencil mark? Like, I just sketched it with paint, and it is just as effective as using a pencil, but I don't have to worry about pencil lines. So I would say that if you're out there and you're trying this and you usually go for a pencil first, try to sketch with paint first. The beauty of gouache, and I'll do it on this side, because again, I'm only going to work on the one side so that I can make sure that I get that mostly resolved for you guys within this hour, right? Over here, if I decide that I don't like where that tree is, I just moved it. It is so easy. You do that with pencil, you're never going to be able to move it. It's one of those things where I would highly suggest that if that's something that you have not tried, give it a whirl. It's going to be a lot easier than you think it is. And gouache is a really forgiving medium. If you don't like something, you can kind of just scrub it right back out. All right, now I'm going to take this blue, which I believe is a cobalt blue, and I got some drippies, which is okay. Take a dry rag and just kind of dot at it. I never scrub any of the drippies that I get on my palette or my painting, just because, again, this reactivates and it's going to start moving everything, which is never fun. And I'm going to take this cobalt blue and I'm going to touch just the top of it and over here, because that's going to be my dark areas. Those are going to be where I really darken my painting quite a lot. And I am going to do that with blues, which is really fun. I can also go over my tree, those shadows a little bit. Right, so that's my initial wash. Nothing is precious. If you decide that you don't like these harsh lines, you can go back in. Again, most of this we're going to cover up. This is just essentially to get the gist of where everything's going to land on your painting. And even with my initial painting that I had, you guys can see that my the light source is actually way over here, where it's a lot kind of more center in this new version here. So it's never going to be exactly the same. That's okay. We have a question?
Yes. How would you seal this when you are done?
You can use a spray varnish. I definitely wouldn't use anything that you have to brush on, because again, it's water soluble and anything you brush on is going to add moisture, even if it's a varnish or anything like that, and it will reactivate your paints. So spray varnish is key, but I personally wouldn't do any kind of a sealant. I would actually just frame it under glass, but that's me personally. So up to you as an artist. Okay, so now I can actually tell you that the center of my piece here, right where I had this initial wash down, is actually pretty dry. I can actually touch it. It's got a little bit of moisture there, but that's okay. Now we're gonna actually start from here and work our way out. And that's gonna be, again, very similar to like if you were to use watercolor, you work from your lights to your darks. So we're gonna start with the lightest area, which is right in that center, and then we're gonna work our way out. Now I have white and this permanent lemon over here, where it's making a really lovely kind of pale yellow. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to start working my way into this really almost pure white area. And I'm going to dab in Actually, we might be able to go to that side camera where this would make more sense for you guys to see. I'm going to just dab in what sort of appears like little branches. I'm just starting to encroach that space just a little bit. And if I go a little too far and I decide that I don't like that, gouache is really forgiving again. And if I get my brush clean and I get most of the water and the pigment off, I can actually just kind of erase it back out. And no one knows, right? But again, I'm working with almost like this kind of color here, and I'm gonna start working my way in. So, just a little bit. And again, you would work on both sides. So you would go this way, right? And maybe there's a little bit of bush and like have a little bit of that kind of pathway come up. And that is where I'm going to leave that, right? Now, if I decide that I want a little bit of a lighter area to sort of kind of come over here, I can add white. This is the beauty of gouache. If I want to pull that light back over where I wanted it kind of off center, I can kind of do that with a little bit of more white added to it. And it ups the opacity if I have less water on my brush, but I can absolutely sort of go back in and erase those areas back out, right? You can go as far as like using just a pure white, right? Which is really cool. And I'm not trying to do anything perfect. I'm just dabbing little areas to where it looks like just an indication of foliage happening back there on that very back level, right? And then, like I said, you're gonna work on this almost like a bullseye and work way out, but again, I'm gonna go on just this one side. I'm gonna start mixing up my next layer, which is gonna just be a slightly more orange version. So I can actually just pull in this the permanent yellow deep that I have already on my palette. And then I'm going to just do the exact same thing. Now, if you're finding that you have too much, like it's getting too wet right here, like I just dabbed on just a couple things, and that's a lot of water. We're gonna try and control our water here. So just a little bit will go a long way. And that's why I always have a rag next to me. It will kind of help you to control just how much water you have going on there. And again, I'm not trying to do the exact same shapes over top of what I just did, because this initial shape came all the way out to here. My next one is going to go here. And I'm not trying to follow the exact same lines. I'm going to do kind of jaggedy areas where it's going to go back and forth. And maybe this one goes this way, but maybe it goes up here. And again, I'm using these shapes here as inspiration, but I don't have to perfectly copy what's going on there. But I do know that it is going to start kind of coming across that this pathway has sort of started right about here, and it's going to start getting darker. And I'm going to actually try to remind myself not to go over to that side, even though I really want to. All right. So just indicating. Now, here's where we're going to start getting a little wild with it. And we're going to take some of this purpley red that we had, and I'm going to start making intentional mud. Now, actually, let's go to that overhead because you're going to really see this color mix here. So I pulled this purpley red that I had here, and I'm mixing back into this puddle of yellow and white and this permanent yellow deep here. See that? It's really pretty mud, right? Now it is a touch dark. Now what you can do is you can either add white or you can add more water to lighten this value here. I'm gonna actually just add white because I want the opacity, because if you add more water, you're just making it more transparent. But I am gonna also add just a touch more water too. I'm gonna add both. And if you decide that you don't like how sort of brown this is, you can actually pull in more of this red and make it almost like a pinky mud. We're making pink mud here, right? Now again, I am going to try and control my water, so I am going to just remove a lot of it and just dip just the touch of the tip of my brush here, just to get my brush loaded with just enough, but not a ton. And then I'm going to just put it down on top of that initial kind of yellowy layer that I had and see how I feel about it. If I decide that I don't like that and I want to tweak it, this is the time to do it. But I like that so far. Now I am going to start to indicate there is some sort of tree thing happening here. And it goes all the way up here. And trees always start thicker and taper up, and it gets thinner the taller they get, and it gets thinner the further out on the branch you get. So the closer you get to the base of this tree, the thicker it's going to be. So I'm going to say that the thickness of this tree is about the width of my brush, right? So it might even be a little bit wider, but it has another branch that kind of throws off this way. But no matter what, I am never going to get thicker as I go up. I'm going to get thinner, because that's going to really help me indicate that it is a tree that's growing out, because trees don't really get thicker at the top, they get thicker at the bottom, because it has to balance it out and sort of stabilize the tree, right? And then it actually is quite thick over here, but then it gets thinner, and then there's more tree branches. And I'm just, again, sort of using that as inspiration. Now, there's tree branches happening all over, and this is where I'm going to start indicating where they are. Now, if I draw one on top of the other, that's okay. This is the initial sort of sketching. Now, I got thinner down here. It doesn't look right. The reason why is because trees don't do that. So I got to remember to get thicker and then get thinner, right? And I am sketching one on top of the other. This is a pretty transparent layer, so it's not going to make that big of a difference, but I am going to start indicating whether or not the bases of my trees are more forward or kind of where they land in space. So if the tree trunk of this one lands higher than this one, that means that it is behind it. And I will have to keep that in mind as I start layering there. Now, it might not be exactly that way here. You can pull trees forward or backwards by doing that. And then I'm going to have a couple of them over here. Now, the further over I get, the more this wash is going to start disappearing, because it's getting closer and closer to the same color that I have down here. And that's okay. I'm not going to be upset if part of it disappears. I still have just an indication that it's there. But I'll just start doing tree branches kind of a thing, right? And then I have one tree that sort of comes this way, and I'm not super worried about it. But that is my first initial layer on my trees, right? Now, if I decide that I want to start getting some tree branches this way, because trees, when they grow up, they also are going to grow out. So you're going to have all these lovely branches that sort of crisscross. This is the time to start placing those in too, because they also start moving back in space. And I'm just using the flat edge of my brush almost as like a liner. Now, if a round brush works better for you as an artist, go ahead, switch to a round brush. There's no wrong answer as far as the shape of the brush is concerned. I just like to use a flat brush because I can pull really thin straight lines with the flat edge of my brush, or I can pull thicker ones if I turn it. It's a really, really versatile tool. But I am going to go, and this is where you would have tree branches coming this way and that way. And remember, it goes up and out, so you're going to do it on both sides. We have a question?
Yeah, Suzanne on Facebook was wondering if you could remind us why you chose to do this in gouache versus watercolor, if there are any advantages or purpose, like, for choosing one over the other.
I love the opacity of gouache. I love that I can do all this craziness and get that opacity back. And when I start really layering on these trees, you're gonna see that. And for me as an artist, I love being able to work that way. If watercolor works better for you, go ahead and use watercolor. There's no wrong answer. Just be aware that you are gonna have to work with that transparency of just initial watercolor kind of a thing. It's one of those things that you're just gonna have to be aware of. So again, no wrong answers, but I do love that question. All right, so Now is where I'm going to start getting a little bit more of that opacity, right? And this tree is quite light. It is very similar to the color that we painted, but I do want to start getting a little bit more opacity to it to kind of really solidify where it is, right? And I sort of made the exact same color, just with less water. And this is how I'm going to start indicating the shadow side, right? And with this, because of this sort of bullseye effect that we have going on, the further up we're going to get, the darker our tree is going to get. The more it's going to start leaning towards those purples, right? So this is going to be worked out in stages. So while we're really close to the center, it's going to be those lighter values and kind of lighter washes. And then as we get higher, it's going to go darker. And then as we move out, it's going to get darker too. I'm going to sort of indicate that there's a tree branch here-ish. And again, I'm not worried about if I'm going over top of one or the other. I can start indicating all of that later, once I get to those layers, right? Sort of indicate it just like that. Now, once I get to the bottom of my tree, I don't want to just end it in a straight line. Trees don't ever just end in the dirt at a straight line. That would just be weird. They have dirt and leaves and stuff that kind of accumulate at the base of them. So when it comes to ending the bottom of your tree, I tend to sort of stipple on leaves, because it's should be relatively the same value while we're working in this sort of, it's almost like a monochromatic kind of effect here. But if I start stippling on that indicates that there's some kind of foliage, and it gives me sort of a more organic kind of layering effect. And again, if I don't like this color later on, I can always go on top of it and obliterate it with other colors or more opaque layers as well. Now this one, since it happens, this tree right here happens to actually be further back than this one, I am going to use a little bit more water with this same color wash, where it's just slightly less opaque. And this one, this is kind of what I was talking about, where you start indicating trees on top of one another. This one sort of layers on top of this one. And I'm not trying to draw perfectly straight lines. I'm just trying to give an indication. Now, if I decide that I don't like that perfectly straight line that I had here, I can take, again, clean, mostly dry brush. It's got some water on there. I can actually just dab at that and it sort of blends it in. I'm okay with it not being super blended in. On all areas, it's okay. And where a tree branch comes out, you're gonna have the whole sort of, I can try and point it out here. Like this tree branch right here, it has volume. It's going to kind of have a sort of indication. I might be able to actually like draw it here. It's gonna have, get a little bit more opaque paint here. It's gonna have sort of like an oval where it's connected, right? And then it has volume, right? So a tree branch, whenever it's starting to come out of a tree, it's gonna have a lot lower on one side and then it grows up and out. And that is going to really indicate that it is a tree that's kind of growing up and out. Now, remember how I said this is a very forgiving medium. That line that I just drew and the dots that I just got on there is gone. I just took a clean sort of damp brush and scrubbed it out. And if it had dried, I can still do that because it will reactivate with water. All right, so now I'm going to actually get a little bit more orangey purple. And again, this orange that I have, this permanent orange, it leans more towards red than it does yellow. The purple that I have leans more towards red than it does blue. Because that purple leans more red and this leans more red, they're gonna make a pretty kind of mud. And that mud is not gonna be a funky brown. It's gonna have that sort of red tinge to it. And if I want even more red tinge to it, I can also add more red. But they're gonna kind of work really well together because they have those bias. Now, that's where I'm gonna start indicating these trees kind of coming down. Now, I didn't exactly do the same thing with this initial painting here. Every time I paint something, it's like I do it all over again. It's its own painting, really. So if you decide that this is not the color for you, that's also okay. But what I do want, and what I didn't realize, is that I want this tree to be a lot higher. So I'm gonna actually remove the bottom of that because it went down too far, right? I want it to go out further. And again, I got dots of paint. All right, so we're gonna start getting more and more opaque, but I don't want pure colors. I definitely need it to start leaning towards more pastels. Now I pulled this one. Actually, if I pulled that one up, then this one's now in front of it. This is what I have to remember. And I also just got pointed at the time, so I know we're getting later. Katie's yelling at me. All right, so.
Not yelling. Just,
wow.
I know you want to get a lot further than
yelling
you are
with
right
her
now.
eyes. It's one of those things. So this is going to be the name of the game, is layering. So understanding where your trees land, and I want this one to go up too, because if I pull that one up, this one's going to go up. Now I know I obliterated the bottom of that, and if I actually go back in with some of this paint, I can indicate that foliage back in, right? And I'm gonna get a little bit more orange there, but I want my light source to still be on this side. So if I grab an opaque white and mix it into the same color that I was just using, I can actually lighten all of these up quite a bit and then indicate that foliage. There we go. So you see how I just pulled those up just a bit? So forgiving. Now, I do need to have a little bit of that light kind of coming down. And this is where I'm going to start using that, the opacity to my advantage, right? And kind of getting that pathway to look like the light's hitting just the top of those, the leaves that are kind of scattered on the ground. Now, I'm gonna go more orange here, whoop, and I just got a little stripey there, and that's okay. Maybe it's a tree branch in the back. It's all right. And I'm gonna just start getting more and more orange as I work my way out, right? I'm gonna get myself some foliage down here. Again, because this is still kind of wet and I'm dabbing it in, it's not gonna be super in focus, and that's okay. But I'm gonna kind of give myself a mass where this tree, let's say there's a tree sort of growing here and ends there, and then this one comes down, right? Say that's the bottom of the tree. And foliage. And then I'm just gonna kind of dab it. Again, I'm not making every little leaf. I'm just kind of indicating that it's there. And if I give myself a different kind of orange, and the more I go forward and towards those, this area, the more yellow I'm gonna get. And I can even up that opacity. And one thing I really love to do, and this is a really great stage to do it, is if you get a lot of color on your brush and then dip it in your water and then just flick it against your finger, you can get this really fun splatter kind of effect. Just let me actually hold it up here. You guys can see. And that'll give you almost like an indication of leaves and things, which I got here as well. You guys can see it here. So it's a lighter color that I had splattered on top of that. Now, as we're moving towards those purples, I'm going to try and get more purpley pink. That was a lot of white. And I'm using that rose color to kind of help marry the two sides, right? Again, I can go sort of this darker purple, but I think that's wrong. I think we need a step in between there and there. And if I add white to this, give myself almost like a lavender color, very, very Amanda. It's not a very like punchy lavender. It's still pretty desaturated, right? And that's going to give me like a step in between that I can start. That was a lot of water. I can start going in between these. And again, if I'm not layering down every little shape that I see and kind of dabbing in almost like the canopy, right? The tree branches and the light that's kind of playing in between, we can start getting more tree branches here. I can have this kind of start going up even further. And even though I'm not blending these perfectly, that's okay, because I can take my brush, clean it off, and if, again, not perfectly clean, but it has just a little bit of water in there and most of the pigment's taken off, I can start taking my brush and blending those out just a touch, just to kind of indicate there's some kind of a blend. And same thing with this, these tree branches. Now, that one stopped, and then I picked it back up and came over here because I want this tree branch to go over top of it. Now, if you happen to draw through, that's okay, because if you pull your brush, like a wet brush, through it that way, it will also kind of remove that initial line that you did there. And I can pull this purple down as well. I can indicate that there's all kinds of things happening over there. Now, I don't love that that got kind of muddy with that purple, and it's a little confusing as to what's happening there. So if I go back in with that opacity and kind of define the edge of this tree here, I can figure out that that's where that's going. And then again, stipple some foliage, just to kind of indicate that there's a little bit of light happening there. Now, the further up and the more detailed I start getting, the smaller I'm going to go with my brushes. I started off here, I went here, and now I'm going to start going to a smaller brush. And I have one more smaller brush before I get to a round pointed brush for details, right? So if I have that light source happening, I can sort of fade it out just a touch with a wet brush that I'm not making sure that it's super clean or anything. It just has a little bit of water on there. And then get a little bit more of this purple orange mixture. The less orange I mix into it, the more I'm gonna get this like really fun kind of almost like desaturated maroon color. And I really love that for up here where my my trees are kind of going into this darkness up here. We have a question?
Yes. Do you have any tips for keeping mold from growing on a wet palette?
So what you could do is take a cotton swab and some clove oil. Get the clove oil on the cotton swab, and if you put that into like either the front here or into the space here, I wouldn't put it on any of your paints. Keep it separate, and then once you close the lid here, even though it is completely closed, that will help you to keep mold from growing. Clove oil is...
I would say use distilled water too.
Yes.
Don't use tap water.
Distilled water is definitely a friend. Tap water can have bacteria in it, but clove oil is a natural kind of mold killer. So it's one of those things it's quite nice.
And it smells good.
And it smells good. Well, if you don't mind.
So,
If you don't mind clove. Now, I want to address this tree before we completely run out of time, because I really wanted to show you guys how to do this. This I'm going to actually start with the dark side. I know, a little backwards, right? I'm getting that like really lovely kind of burgundy color happening. And I'm going to scrub it on just to kind of define that edge. And the higher up I go, the more blue I'm going to get. There's a darkness there. And then it's sort of tree branches that way, right? And then I am going to say that I need a sort of tree color. And I'm going to take a little bit of either yellow ochre, which is really lovely. It's a yellow, but it is more naturalistic, or even this burnt sienna, and kind of give myself an orangey brown. And I'm going to drag that in as like an indicator of where the rest of my tree lands, because I can go on top of this and I can lighten it. Now, I didn't cover the whole thing perfectly. That's okay. I can always take some water and kind of smooth them together, right? Just kind of give myself a base layer almost, right? And then I'm going to actually add a little bit more blue to the top of this, because it's starting to go up into that really dark area.
Rebecca said she loves how the trees match her hair, and I told her I think you just do it on purpose now.
I have found that my hair matches all of my art, and it's just because I like painting in all of the rainbow colors. All of the colors. Alright, so this is where that little knot is, and I'm using that dark blue again just to kind of indicate those shadows, because it makes sense because it's up here and it's still in there. And the thing is that if I want to get this dark area back over here, I can use that same wash and darken that area as well as up here. Because it does kind of go off into darkness, right? Again, I can use the little indication of leaves. I'm just scrubbing and dabbing. It's okay if it's nothing very specific. I'm gonna get a really lovely like blue purple. And then kind of darken this up a little bit more. And kind of dab that off a little bit. Because here's the thing, is that you can also start indicating little branches coming off of these trees. There's actually right behind this tree, there's a tree that has like a lot of branches. You can go orange with it, you can go quite purple with it, which is quite lovely. Now this over here has already dried, but I can still reactivate it. This is what I meant by gouache. If I start mixing into something that's already dry on my palette, even though that's a custom color that I mixed already and it's dry, I can still use it. So it's quite fun. But I want like an in between those two colors, so. Sort of kind of pull it off, again off into my foliage, and I will probably use something like this for that front area too. Just scrubbing things in. We're not making every little detail, and I do want to have it darker up here So I would have that kind of continue in. And because this sort of goes into darkness over here, I would kind of pull a little bit of that in just to kind of balance it just a touch. Little dabs will do ya, right? And I'm only just working in this little area, and the further I go up and sort of toward that center, the less I'm doing, because I want that to get lighter and brighter, right? Now, this should be mostly dry, and I'm gonna go in with a yellow ochre and some white. So again, it's yellow, but it's like a really neutral yellow. But I don't want super neutral, I want color. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that fun, what is that, the permanent yellow deep in there? Just to kind of, it's a really colorful image. I want funky colors. But this is how I'm gonna indicate the light on this tree, right? I'm going to go, and here's what's great, is that I can use my brush and I can kind of start going sideways just to kind of give the indication that there's volume around this tree. And you can also just use that a dry brush technique that I was showing you guys earlier and kind of scratch it in. And the combination of the two will help you sort of define the form of this tree. And just a little bit more over here. Oop, that was too much, right? That's okay, because if I get a lot of it off on my brush and pick it up, I can actually, as long as I move fast enough, I can obliterate that. Now, if I don't move fast enough, I can just add more water and wipe it right off. Yes, we have a question.
Alan joined on Facebook a little while ago.
Alan!
And he remarked specifically on how incredible the moss is on the...
I was just getting that.
Okay.
I'm literally like, I've been like panic painting to get to that.
You just hit a moss real
Yes,
quick.
I really wanted to get to moss. Moss is so fun with this image. All right, so I'm gonna actually start off with my blue greens here. So I had gone with that bright green, but I think Viridian is the way to go. The reason why is because Viridian leans more towards blue, and we're using blue for our shadows, right? The more in shadow it is, the more purple it gets. So we're just gonna start with our shadowy colors first, and we're just going to sort of dab it on. And my tree, actually where it kind of has that edge, the first initial layer, normally I do kind of paint a hard edge, just to kind of, when it's a large chunk of moss anyway. And then I'm going to turn my brush and use that corner of my brush just to kind of dab in a little bit of little dots sort of here and there. And I'm kind of sort of pushing my brush sometimes and getting it to kind of drag, and I'm just turning my brush and getting it to like kind of have a variation of marks. I'm not trying to be perfect with it. And then of course I would sort of block, we're gonna do that whole area right there with moss, right? And this is our base layer for moss. I'm gonna give us a little bit, some over here. Like it's just sort of growing up the tree, just a touch, right? And there's some down here. And then of course, we're gonna indicate like it still has a ton of moss down here at the bottom, right? Base layer of moss. And then we're gonna slowly get closer and closer towards these yellow greens, right? So I'm gonna go with that bright green. Now, here's the thing. Greens are really, it's a difficult thing to work into a naturalistic painting. Granted, this is not naturalistic whatsoever, but naturalistic greens and the way that moss generally looks, there's no like bright, crazy Kelly green in here because it just looks bizarre. So if I take a little bit of this orange, that I already have on my palette, and just mix it in, it makes it just a little bit more naturalistic and a little less like funky Kelly green kind of a thing. Now, if I want to brighten my color without adding white, because add white, it's going to look chalky, I'm going to start adding yellow, right? Because because I want sort of in between this funky blue-green that I got going on and my highlight layer that I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do is start stippling with my brush, essentially. I'm just tapping and turning it. Actually, if you guys go to that this might be a perfect side camera here. I'm going to just stipple and turn, because if my light source is coming from this direction, that's the side of the moss that I want it to be on, right? And up here, it starts getting a lot more in shadow. So I might not have those highlights, but I might definitely have more opaque layers of these greens. And the more I stipple, the less paint I'm gonna have on my brush, unless I reload. Now here's the fun thing with moss. When it's on the edge of a tree, and I think I got some splatters of things in there, whoops. When it's on the edge of a tree, it is not a hard line. It is a funky kind of leafy growth. So you're gonna want to obliterate that perfect straight edge. You do not want a straight edge with moss. You want it to kind of grow and have almost like these tiny little indications of leaves, right? And again, we're still following that form where my light source is coming from this direction. So I'm only touching sort of the right side of my moss. And I'm letting that shadow kind of stay on this side. Now over here, where that moss kind of comes up, so I can actually turn it this way, haha. Over here where the moss kind of comes up and it's in that shadow, I'm not going to touch it at all, because that's a shadow area and I would not have any light hitting the moss, right? Now this area over here, and you know what, I think I want a little bit more growing. Maybe this gets a little thicker down here, I don't know. All right, now we're going to add more yellow. And I'm going to make an even brighter color. And I still have not added white yet. I'm going to wait for that to the very, very end. And I just got a little bit of it off on my brush, because I want, this is almost pure paint. It's not going to be thick, but it's a really opaque layer. And I don't want a ton of water, because that will give me a transparency. This is again why I love using gouache. And this side of the tree is all in sunshine, so I'm gonna say that it comes up and onto the top of this. And you're just starting to indicate that all of this is in light. Again, I'm turning my brush and trying to not have a reoccurring sort of stippling pattern, because that doesn't make any sense. Nothing is going to repeat like that in nature, especially when it's just a large growth of, essentially, think of it like tiny little leaves. Well, I should take that back. There's a lot of things that repeat in nature now that I think about it, but mostly in flowers. All right, so I'm going to indicate just a touch of light here. And now I'm going to add a teensy weensy amount of white. And I'm only going to do this where I want a ton of light to hit my moss. And it's going to be just on the edge of this. Just kind of going up. And that is it. Moss. Magical tree moss. Haha. Sorry, I really wanted to make sure I got to the moss. Now, with the layering, again, as we go up, we're going to get more purple. As we go out, we're going to get more purple. And you're going to keep layering those things. You're going to keep taking those darker colors. And at the very end, you can start indicating more little tree branches that kind of come in and crisscross. And yeah, I just got a scribble here. That's okay. I can turn that into a thicker tree branch, right? if I didn't love what I did, I can also obliterate it. Maybe there's a tree branch that kind of comes up and is broken. But here's the kicker. You're gonna have, and actually, you know what? This is where I always forget that I need to switch my brushes. You're gonna have some tree branches that are really dark that cross into these areas, right? So I'm gonna have, this is where I'd use my round pointed brushes. I'm gonna make it a little thicker here. And tree branches, when they turn, don't always work in straight lines, but they're gonna have little branches coming off. But they do always get thinner the further out you go. So as long as you follow those rules, it's going to look naturalistic no matter which direction you are painting it in. And I love whenever I turn a tree branch and turn it into space. I like to draw it in straight lines, but wherever I turn it into space, that's usually an indication there was a split in the tree branch, and you can always add in a little bit of a little kind of sort of split happening. And that is how you would get all of your fun little tree branches. And I think that is, oh my gosh, we are already out of time. It's crazy how fast this goes. Do we have any more questions? I wish I'd gotten even further on this. I hope this was enough of an indication on how you can get from that and keep layering and go all the way to this. It's just layer and layer and layer and play with color and kind of experiment and get that kind of bullseye effect. I hope that makes sense. Did we have any more last minute questions? Okay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And of course, if you guys get to actually play along and do this painting yourself, again, remember the link for the reference image has been put in the chats for you guys to go check out. You guys know what materials I've been using, and you understand that layering process and kind of going from light all the way back out to the dark. And if you guys get a chance to do this, please post it. I would love to see your versions of this. It makes me so happy to see you guys and your artwork. But if you do post it, no matter what social media platform you use, make sure you tag JerrysArtarama. That way Amanda can find it and show me. But you can also post it to our Jerry's Live Facebook group, which is free to join if you are not already part of it. All you have to do is go to Facebook, type in Jerry's Live. It should pop up. You'll see I think this background in my face, and then just make sure when you do join, you answer that one security question. Otherwise, you don't get in, and I'm gonna have to yell at you that way. But please post it. I would love to see your artwork. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and got to experiment with some gouache. It's one of my favorite mediums. I really do love it. But of course, that is the time that we have here today. And make sure you do come back next week because Michaela is going to be on and she's going to have a guest artist. Jeff Olson is going to be on with us, and he is going to be talking about Cobra water mixable oils, which is going to be so much fun. And I understand it's a little confusing, but he's got all the information for you guys, and it's going to be such a fun show. So I hope to see you guys later, and you enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye!